Hello everyone. So in this last video, we're going to be talking about Anaximander's cosmogony and his cosmology and a bit of his astronomy, biology, meteorology, but yeah, let's see. So his cosmogony, basically, we already have more or less an idea of from his theory of mind and matter. So as you sort of would recall, his theory of matter, you have an original undifferentiated mass, a central mass, which was motionless. So everything started from this motionless, undifferentiated mass, in which everything was mixed in everything. This motion was first introduced by this nous, by the mind, and rotation. It was introduced. Motion was introduced as a rotationary motion. So there was original rotation, and this rotation still continues, right? So there is this original rotation, and this rotation is sort of outwards. So there's this circularity of this rotationary motion which was introduced, which continues outwards. And this mind also ordered things originally, continues to order things, and will continue to order things in this ever-increasing rotation sort of field, right? There's this ever-increasing rotation. And then we do know that this rotating cosmos was originally small, because it was this tiny thing, and it's continually growing and it's continually expanding. And I suppose because matter is infinite, that means that what it actually means is that the rotationary section was originally small by mind's action, and then it is the motion is being introduced increasingly in the infinite mass. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, because remember, there's no such thing as an empty space. So what is outside of this infinite, I don't know. Right. So also everything that the mind sort of tends to rotate, tends to separate. So you have a constantly expanding universe in that sense, but also things are moving further and further away from each other, which does sound familiar, right? Right. So expanding universe, things moving further and further away from each other. And interestingly, the speed of rotation is ever increasing, right? It's tremendous already. It's something we can't imagine, and it's increasing in like paths. So it's an accelerating world as well. Not an idea of like the big chill, but like an increasing motion of things. And still, like the original mixture that was rotated, right, that original mass was not a unity, it was a mixture of all things, and it contained everything. So whatever is being formed, even if things are being formed and they look absolutely different, like, something is a tree, something is a rock, something is water, something is air, right, even if things are absolutely different, you have a plurality of infinite parts to them which contain that seeds of that original mixture, and that original mixture, remember, contained everything, right? And which is why you have the doctrine of everything is contained in everything, right? And very importantly, and this is something that he's doing different from the earlier philosophers who talk about motion, is that there is no eternal motion, right? Motion has a first cause, and that first cause of motion is the mind, this nous, which moves everything. Right, now let's look at a few of the fragments where he will talk about, where he talks about his cosmology as well, cosmogony and cosmology. So cosmogony, you have some fragments in which he's talking about separating off. So he's talking about how the air and the ether are separated off, and he's talking about how the different sort of elements, the dense, the moist, the cold, the dark, they come together to form the earth, and the rare and the dry and the bright move outwards to form the air and the atmosphere. So very Anaximander-like, I think, the sort of cosmogony that he's talking about. No rings of fire, but remember, he got into trouble for claiming that the sun was a burning rock or burning piece of metal or something. So you have nevertheless a kind of very naturalistic idea of, because everything is material in that sense, only the ordering principle is almost immaterial, but everything else is very, very material, right? So yeah, you have fragments in which he's talking about how the earth is solidified and water is separated off into clouds, earth from water, and stone solidified by the cold. So like, he gives very natural philosophy explanations, which you can have a look at the fragments, which are there in the text that I will share with you. There is a lot of separating out and coalescing, which happens, remember, through the action of the mind and the rotationary motion. And the rotationary motion, if you also remember, is once it starts, it's almost purely mechanical, even though the mind is controlling all things, except with with living beings, but because with living beings, there is a portion of the mind in all of us. Then what else? Nourishment and growth, we already talked about, how everything nourishes everything else, because everything contains portion of everything else. So when we take in air and water and food, so it contains sort of, seeds of things that compose us. So there's that notion as well. Then what else is interesting out here? A lot of things that are interesting, but not focusing too much on it. He talks about how the sun sort of causes brightness in the moon. So the moon is not like itself bright, but the sun induces moon with brightness. Then the rainbows are a reflection of the sun in the clouds. I think we also had that in Xenophanes, but here as well you have this idea of the rainbows are. But in Xenophanes you had these sparks. Like everything was contained of these like little fiery sparks. Here you have more of an idea of the reflection of the sun in the clouds is the rainbow. So he's getting close enough, I would say. And then this one sounds a lot like Anaximander, to be honest, where he talks about the earth being flat in shape, suspended in the middle of nothing, because there is no void, and the air sort of keeps it afloat, which sounds like a mixture of the earlier pre-Socratics. Maybe true, but this is not a fragment, this is a testimonia, so we don't need to take it at its word, right? Then we have things from biology where he talks about that what is called bird's milk is the white of the egg. So the egg is what is nourishing the birds. And animals sort of arose first in moisture, because remember, everything contains everything. And then from one another as well. So the sexual reproduction comes later, like with Empedocles. And then this is another one in which Theophrastus sort of says, Anaxagoras, when he says that the air contains the seeds of all things, and that it is these seeds which, when carried down to the rain, give rise to plants, right? So that plants are also nourished by air, we would now say we need oxygen for sort of photosynthesis or something, with this thing. But what Anaximander is already getting at is that these things are what nourish the plants, air included, even though you think it doesn't. So water and air and everything. Basically also, finally, he also thinks, he places a lot of importance on sense perception, which we saw with Empedocles and earlier with Heraclitus to some extent, that you need to trust your senses. When you see the world around you, don't go completely Parmenidean or Zeno and just sort of say, no, my mind says everything is illusion, this is all, deceiving ordering of my words. He says, no. You need to trust your senses. There is something about the senses that can be trusted, right? In fact, if I can read out this thing from Theophrastus, he says, perception is by opposites, for like is not affected by like. A thing that is warm or as cold as we are does not either warm or cool us by its approach, nor can we recognize sweetness or bitterness by the like. Rather, we know cold by warm, fresh by salt, and sweet by bitter, in proportion to our deficiency in each. So that's how we feel things. In fact, our perception is also colored by opposites. And this idea you will get in the Atomist, which we'll cover in the next week, where our perception of things is relative to what we have. And so everything is in us already, but what we perceive of is sort of, we might contain less proportion of something, or maybe less on the surface presence of something, which gives us the opposite perception, right? So if we feel cold or warm, or if we feel sweet or bitter, so it's to the proportion of our deficiency of each, right? So there's also this idea of sensation, which comes from like the material sensation, and he's talking very strongly of like the idea of material sensation. How do we feel things? And the last one that is fairly fascinating, and we have been mentioning it since Anaximander, and then we mentioned it in Empedocles, where it was definitely there, Anaximander, where we guess it was there, but in Anaxagoras, again, we have this idea that's there. So fragment 4, Simplicius in physics, in commentary on Aristotle's physics, he says, we must suppose that men have been formed and the other animals have life, and that men have inhabited cities and cultivated fields, just as we have here, and sun and the moon and so on, just as we have, and that earth brings forth for them all manner of produce, of which they garner the best into their houses and use it. So much then have I said about the process of separating off, that separation would have taken place not only here with us, but elsewhere too. Right, and now we are moving away from a simple idea of the succession of worlds. Maybe that's also there, but he's not talking about the succession of worlds, but he's talking about the presence of worlds in this kind of infinite, what do you call it? The sort of simultaneous or synchronous existence of multiple worlds, right? These worlds are there everywhere else. Sorry, I'm just trying to look for another fragment, which I can perhaps find. I don't know. Yeah, doesn't matter, right? So this idea of like innumerable worlds sort of simultaneously, because why should only our world have been created? So other worlds could have been created. They could also have life. They could also have, you know, suns and moons. In fact, with atomists, we'll get a proper science fiction version of it, which later on turns out to be science. So, you know, science fiction is actually powerful in that sense. Yeah, there's another one in Simplicus where he says, having said, however, that there are many things in taste and men have been formed and have life, he adds that men have and use it. That he's hinting at another world in addition to our own is clear from the phrase, which he uses more than once, just as we have. And that he does not regard this other world as a perceptible world which preceded this world in time is clear from the words of which they garner the best into their houses and use it. So it's not about succession in time, but the presence at the same time of innumerable worlds. For he did not say used, but use. Nor does he mean that they are now inhabiting other regions of the same world as our own, for he did not say they have the sun and the moon just as we too have. So he's not talking about our world with other people, but the sun and the moon as we have. So they have their own suns and their own moons, right? As if he were talking of a different sun and a moon. So this idea, which is brilliant at that time, you know, Earth is not the center, and also Earth is not the only one. We have other worlds, we have many other worlds, and perhaps innumerable other worlds, which have their own suns and their own moons and their own planets and their own sort of everything. So this is something that's an amazing introduction out here, and it required a notion of plurality, which we got, for example, with Anaximander. I mean, Empedocles also has an idea of innumerable worlds, but they are successive. With Anaximander, this infinite separation of matter, which is expanding, gives us a fairly brilliant notion of innumerable worlds. So as you can see, with Anaximander, we have some extremely brilliant ideas. So we have, I mean, apart from the cosmology, to summarize from the earlier theories, we have the idea of infinity, which is extremely strong. And I think that's, for me, that's one of the most interesting ideas I can get from Anaxagoras, is of the infinite divisibility, which leads us to understand numerical infinity in a very profound sense of there's the infinity of infinity of infinity of infinity, first of all, right, infinite times, and that the smallest infinity is biunivocally correspondent, if you can use that term, with the largest infinity, which means that the largest is as big as the smallest. A challenge of Zeno answered head on. And this infinity is contained in everything, which means that the microcosm is contained in the macrocosm and vice versa. And this sort of shows in different ways, in plural ways, in a variety of ways in our whole variety of world, but everything contains the original stuff of things, the original matter of things is the same. The original mind that controls everything is also the same. So this kind of a unity in plurality, and this plural unity and the original plurality which forms the unity of the whole world. It's I think, one of the most brilliant ideas that I have encountered, you know, though I have said that about every single philosopher so far that we have covered, so maybe I am just sort of fascinated by some of the ideas that are being brought up here. But Anaxagoras, that I would say is his one great achievement, if not many others. Yeah? Great, thank you.